Part 5. The Fleet That Stood Together Final. Darkness swallowed the royal flagship. Emergency lights flickered weakly across the ruined command chamber, while distant explosions shook the ship from every direction. Smoke filled the air. Somewhere below the lower decks, soldiers screamed over broken communication channels. The enemy had nearly reached the core of the flagship. Commander Varric activated a portable tactical screen beside the damaged command table. "Our defense lines are collapsing," he said grimly. Red warning signals covered almost the entire ship. Enemy boarding units were everywhere. The Alliance fleet outside was suffering even worse. Dozens of friendly warships drifted through space burning while enemy cruisers pushed deeper toward the center formation. Queen Serelith stared silently at the battlefield outside the shattered windows. If the flagship fell, the war would end tonight, and the Alliance would die with it. Beside her, Ethan pressed one hand against his wounded shoulder while studying the tactical display carefully. Then suddenly, he noticed something. The enemy isn't trying to destroy the fleet. Commander Varric frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ethan pointed toward the hologram. "Look at their movement patterns." The officers zoomed the battlefield closer. Enemy ships ignored several weak Alliance cruisers completely. Instead, they continued closing around the flagship itself, like hunters surrounding prey. "They want the Queen alive," Ethan said quietly. The room fell silent. Queen Serelith's expression darkened. Commander Varric clenched his fists. "If they capture her, the Empire collapses." "No," Ethan corrected calmly. "If they capture her publicly, your people surrender without another fight." The realization hit the room hard. This attack was never about revenge. It was about breaking the Alliance completely. Another explosion rocked the flagship violently. Part of the ceiling collapsed nearby. A wounded officer rushed into the chamber. "Enemy assault teams are approaching the command deck." Varric pulled out his plasma blade instantly. "Prepare final defense positions." But Ethan suddenly stepped forward. "You still have fighter squadrons." Varric looked confused. Why?" "Because your enemy is overconfident." The commander narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Ethan pointed toward the enemy formation again. "They focused everything on this ship." One officer slowly understood. "They left gaps." Ethan nodded once. "Humans call it tunnel vision." Commander Varric stared at him for several seconds. Then finally, "You have a plan." "I have a stupid plan," Ethan corrected. The Queen almost smiled slightly after hearing that. Minutes later, the remaining Alliance forces launched everything they had left. Human fighter pilots led the attack first. Instead of defending normally, they flew directly into the enemy formation at impossible angles. Alien commanders watched in shock. The maneuver looked reckless, chaotic, almost suicidal. But that was exactly why it worked. Enemy ships struggled to react against human unpredictability. Explosions spread across the battlefield as Alliance bombers slipped through the weak points Ethan discovered. For the first time since the attack began, the enemy fleet started losing ground. Inside the flagship, heavy fighting erupted outside the command deck doors. Royal Guards exchanged plasma fire with advancing enemy soldiers while alarms screamed endlessly. Then suddenly, the main doors exploded inward. Enemy assault troops stormed into the chamber. The final battle had arrived. Commander Varric charged forward immediately with his plasma blade. Royal Guards followed behind him. The room became chaos. Ethan grabbed a fallen rifle with one hand while protecting his injured shoulder with the other. Despite the pain, he kept firing calmly. One enemy soldier rushed toward Queen Serelith from the side. Ethan shot him before the blade reached her. Another attacker appeared behind Ethan. The Queen fired first. The enemy collapsed instantly. For a brief moment, human and Queen fought side by side. No royal distance, no politics, only survival. Then the chamber suddenly shook harder than before. Outside the windows, A gigantic enemy warship emerged through the battlefield smoke, larger than every other vessel. Its weapons charged directly toward the flagship. An officer looked horrified. That's their command ship. Everyone understood immediately. If that ship fired, the flagship would be destroyed instantly. Commander Varric turned pale. We can't stop that weapon in time. Silence filled the chamber. Then Ethan slowly looked toward the launch bay display. A single damaged strike craft remained operational. When he made his decision instantly. No, he said quietly. I can stop it. The Queen immediately understood. You will not survive that attack. Ethan checked the fighter systems quickly. Probably not. You are injured already. Ethan gave a weak smile. Yeah. Been a rough day. The Queen stepped toward him. For the first time since they met, fear was visible in her silver eyes. Real fear. Not for herself. For him. You cannot ask this of me, she said softly. Ethan looked surprised. I'm not asking permission. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a flight helmet and moved toward the exit. The Queen suddenly caught his arm. The entire room froze. Royalty did not touch outsiders willingly. Ever. But Serelith held on to him tightly. You carried me when nobody else dared, she whispered. Her voice shook slightly. Do not make me watch you die. For one brief second, Ethan simply looked at her. Then he answered quietly. If I don't go, everyone here dies. Silence. The Queen slowly released his arm. Ethan turned and ran toward the launch bay. Minutes later, the final strike craft launched from the damaged flagship. The entire Alliance fleet watched the tiny fighter race directly toward the massive enemy command ship alone. Enemy weapons opened fire instantly. Explosions surrounded the fighter from every direction. But Ethan never changed course. Inside the command chamber, Queen Serelith stood completely still while watching the battle through the main screen. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. A blinding white explosion consumed the enemy command ship. For several seconds, the battlefield disappeared in light. Shockwaves tore through space itself. And when the light finally faded, the enemy flagship was gone. Completely destroyed. Silence spread across the stars. Then slowly, enemy ships began retreating. The battle was over. The Alliance had survived. Part 4. The second attack. The Alliance fleet barely had time to prepare. Across hundreds of damaged warships, emergency sirens screamed through dark hallways while exhausted soldiers rushed back to combat stations. Many ships still burned from the previous battle. Some had no shields left. Others could barely move. And now another enemy fleet was approaching through the wreckage of space itself. Inside the royal flagship, Commander Varric stared at the tactical display with growing anger. How many enemy ships? A nervous officer answered immediately. Current estimate, 143. Several commanders went pale. The Alliance fleet was already weakened. Another full battle could destroy them completely. Queen Serelith stepped beside the holographic map despite the pain in her injured leg. The medical treatment was unfinished. Her movements were slower now. But nobody dared mention it. Show enemy formation, she ordered calmly. The display shifted instantly. Red enemy markers spread across the outer battlefield in a massive attack pattern. Ethan studied the formation carefully from nearby. Then his expression changed slightly. They're not attacking randomly. Commander Varric looked annoyed. Explain. Ethan pointed toward the center of the hologram. They're closing every escape route. The room grew quieter. One officer zoomed the map outward. The human was right. The unknown fleet was surrounding them slowly from multiple directions. They want something, Ethan continued. Varric crossed his arms. Obviously. Ethan looked directly at the central attack line. They want the Queen. Silence filled the command chamber. Several officers exchanged nervous looks. 'Cause deep down, they knew he was probably right. Suddenly the flagship shook violently. Boom! The entire chamber trembled as explosions echoed through nearby decks. Enemy long-range fire detected. Shields dropping. Another impact hit the ship seconds later. Warning lights flashed red everywhere. Outside the massive windows, distant warships exploded into burning debris. The second attack had begun. Commander Varric immediately activated fleet communications. All combat divisions engage enemy targets immediately. The battlefield erupted into chaos once again. Blue plasma fire crossed the darkness of space while damaged Alliance ships desperately returned fire. But the enemy fleet moved differently. Cleaner, faster, more organized. They ignored weaker ships completely. Every attack pushed directly toward the royal flagship. Toward the Queen. "They're trying to board us," Ethan said. Before anyone could answer, emergency alarms changed tone. A security officer shouted across the chamber. "Boarding signatures detected." The room froze. Enemy assault units had breached the flagship. Commander Varric immediately pulled his plasma blade free. "Protect the Queen." Royal Guard surrounded Serelith instantly while soldiers rushed toward the lower corridors. Distant gunfire echoed through the ship. Screams followed seconds later. The enemy was already inside. Ethan looked toward the Queen. "You need to leave this deck." Serelith's silver eyes narrowed. "I will not run." "That's not what I said." Another explosion shook the chamber. Part of the ceiling collapsed nearby, showering sparks across the floor. The flagship was losing stability fast. A wounded soldier suddenly stumbled into the command room covered in blood. They broke through Sector 7. Before he could continue, a plasma shot tore through his chest from behind. The soldier collapsed instantly. Everyone spun toward the doorway. 3 enemy assassins stepped through the smoke. Tall armored figures wearing black combat suits. No insignias. No visible faces. Only glowing red visors. And every weapon pointed directly at the Queen. The Royal Guards opened fire immediately. The chamber exploded into violence. Plasma bolts lit the room blue and red while soldiers crashed into cover. One assassin moved with terrifying speed, slicing through 2 guards before anyone reacted. Another fired directly toward Serelith. Ethan grabbed the Queen instantly and pulled her behind the command platform. The plasma blast destroyed the wall behind them. "You really attract problems," Ethan muttered. The Queen almost looked offended. Then another assassin appeared beside them. Too fast. Its energy blade moved straight toward Serelith's chest. Ethan reacted without thinking. He shoved the Queen backward, and the glowing blade pierced directly through his shoulder. Pain exploded through his body instantly. Ethan dropped to one knee as blood hit the floor. The assassin raised the weapon again. But Serelith moved first. Despite her injured leg, the Queen grabbed a fallen plasma rifle and fired directly into the assassin's helmet. The enemy collapsed instantly. The chamber slowly fell silent except for distant battle alarms. The remaining assassins were dead. But Ethan remained kneeling on the floor, holding his bleeding shoulder tightly. Black smoke drifted through the ruined command room. Several guards stared at Ethan in disbelief. The human had taken the strike meant for the Queen. Commander Varric approached carefully. "You shielded her." Ethan forced out a painful breath. "Yeah. That usually happens when someone swings a sword at the person beside you." The commander looked strangely speechless. Queen Serelith stepped toward Ethan slowly. For the first time since the human entered her life, the Queen looked genuinely shaken. Blood continued running down Ethan's arm. "You are wounded badly," she said quietly. "I noticed. You protected me." Ethan looked up at her tiredly. "You'd do the same for your people." The Queen froze slightly after hearing those words. Because that was the problem. Royal rulers were not expected to risk themselves for others. But this human kept doing exactly that. Again and again. Another explosion rocked the flagship violently. The battle outside was getting worse. An officer shouted from across the chamber. Enemy ships are breaching the inner defense line. Commander Varric cursed under his breath. If the flagship falls, the fleet collapses. Ethan slowly forced himself back to his feet despite the injury. You still have operational fighters. Varric looked confused. Some. Good, Ethan said while holding his bleeding shoulder. Because your enemy just made a mistake. The commander narrowed his eyes. What mistake? Ethan looked toward the burning battlefield outside the command windows. They focused everything on the Queen. His expression hardened. And forgot about the humans. Part 3. The Emperor's Wrath. The medical chamber remained completely silent after the Emperor's message ended. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Every person in the room understood the danger now. The Emperor had spoken directly. And when the ruler of the Empire demanded someone surrendered, refusing was almost impossible. Commander Varric slowly turned toward Ethan with cold satisfaction in his eyes. You should feel honored, he said darkly. Most criminals never receive the Emperor's personal attention. Several guards laughed nervously. But Ethan did not react. He simply looked toward Queen Serelith. You people always this dramatic. A few soldiers nearly choked hearing that sentence. Commander Varric stepped forward instantly. Watch your tongue, human. Ethan finally looked at him. Or what? The tension inside the chamber exploded. Plasma rifles powered on immediately. Dozens of glowing weapons aimed directly at Ethan's chest. One wrong movement would kill him instantly. But somehow, the human still looked calm. Queen Serelith watched him carefully from the medical platform. Every instinct told her this human should be terrified by now. Yet Ethan stood surrounded by armed soldiers without fear in his eyes. Made no sense. Varric's voice became colder. You stand accused of violating sacred royal law. I carried an injured person. You humiliated the Queen before the fleet. Ethan frowned. How exactly? Varric looked furious now. You touched royal blood without permission. She was falling. That does not matter. It mattered to me. Silence. Again. The same impossible silence Ethan kept creating every time he spoke. Because his answers were simple, direct, and painfully honest. Commander Varric finally lost patience. Enough. He pointed toward Ethan. Arrest him. The guards moved immediately. Weapons raised. Boots echoing across the chamber floor. Several doctors quickly backed away. Everyone expected Ethan to resist. But he simply stood still. Then suddenly, stop! The Queen's voice cut through the room like a blade. Every guard froze instantly. Varric slowly turned toward her. Your Majesty, the Emperor himself has given the order. And I, Serelith answered coldly, have not. The room became dangerously quiet. Nobody challenged direct royal authority. Not even Varric. But the commander still refused to back down completely. The fleet watched this human carry you through the flagship, he said carefully. Rumors are spreading already. If we ignore this, you believe I require political advice? The Queen interrupted. Varric immediately lowered his head. No, Your Majesty. Serelith slowly stood from the medical bed despite the pain shooting through her injured leg. The doctors panicked instantly. You must not stand yet. The treatment is incomplete. But the Queen ignored them completely. She stepped forward carefully, one painful step at a time. Her silver eyes never left Ethan. Then suddenly, her injured leg weakened again. Several guards rushed forward. But Ethan moved first. He caught her arm before she could fall. The entire chamber froze once more. Another moment of contact. Another broken royal law. Varric looked ready to explode. But this time, the Queen did not pull away. For one brief second, Serelith simply remained standing beside the human supporting her weight. Then she quietly spoke. Release me. Ethan immediately stepped back. No arguments, no hesitation. The Queen steadied herself again before turning toward the guards. No one will arrest the human. Shock spread across the chamber. Even Varric looked stunned. Your Majesty. That is my final command. The commander's jaw tightened hard enough to crack bone. But before he could answer, emergency alarms suddenly echoed across the flagship. Red warning lights flashed across the chamber walls. A communications officer rushed inside, breathing heavily. Commander, we have unidentified movement near the outer fleet perimeter. Varric frowned immediately. What kind of movement? The officer swallowed nervously. Unknown warships. The room changed instantly. Politics no longer mattered. The war might not actually be over. Varric stormed toward the holographic display table in the center of the chamber. A star map appeared above it. Dozens of small red signals blinked near the edge of Alliance space. Ethan stepped closer. That's not debris, he said quietly. No, Varric admitted. The commander zoomed the image closer. The ships were moving slowly through the destroyed battlefield, hiding among wreckage from the previous battle. Silent. Waiting. Queen Seralitha's expression darkened immediately. Identify them. The officer's hands shook while scanning the signals. Then his face turned pale. We can't. What do you mean you can't? No registry codes. No alliance markings. No imperial signatures. Ethan stared at the map carefully. They were hiding during the battle. Varric looked toward him sharply. You sound certain. Because that's what humans would do. The commander clearly hated agreeing with him. But deep down, he knew the human might be right. Another officer suddenly shouted from the hallway. Incoming energy spikes. The hologram flashed red. One of the unknown ships powered its weapons. Then another. And another. The room instantly erupted into chaos. Battle stations. Raise shields. Protect the flagship. Outside the medical chamber, warning sirens spread across the entire fleet. Through the giant observation windows, distant lights suddenly appeared among the stars. Enemy ships. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. And they were moving directly toward the weakened Alliance fleet. The war was not over. Had only paused. Commander Varric activated fleet-wide communications immediately. All combat units prepare for immediate engagement. Panic spread through the ship. Injured soldiers rushed through hallways. Weapons systems powered on again. Damaged ships struggled to restart shields. And in the middle of the chaos, Queen Seralith nearly collapsed once more from pain. This time Ethan moved beside her instantly. You shouldn't even be standing right now. Several guards looked furious hearing him speak to the Queen that way. But Seralith surprised everyone again. She looked directly at Ethan and asked quietly, If I cannot stand during war, then when should I stand? Ethan had no answer. For a brief second, the two simply stared at each other while alarms screamed around them. Then the main fleet screen suddenly flashed bright red. The moment Commander Ethan Cole carried Queen Seralith into the Royal Medical Chamber, the entire fleet descended into chaos. Military communication channels exploded with panic. A human touched the Queen. He carried her through the flagship. Royal law has been violated. Across hundreds of warships, officers replayed the footage in disbelief. The image spread faster than the battle reports themselves. The mighty Queen of the Thalrex Empire, resting in the arms of a human. For many aliens, the sight felt almost unreal. Some soldiers called Ethan brave. Others demanded his execution immediately. Inside the medical chamber, however, nobody cared about politics anymore. The Queen's condition was worsening. Bright medical lights filled the silver room while emergency machines activated around her. Alien physicians rushed forward the second Ethan lowered Seralith carefully onto the treatment platform. Move aside. Stabilize her vitals. Prepare bone reconstruction systems. The doctors worked quickly, but the fear on their faces kept growing. One physician scanned the Queen's leg twice before speaking. "The fracture is severe." Another doctor looked horrified. "She continued walking with this injury." The chief physician turned toward Ethan sharply. "How long was she standing after the crash?" Ethan answered calmly. "Long enough to nearly collapse." The doctors exchanged nervous looks. One finally whispered, "She should not even be conscious." Queen Serelith remained silent while machines surrounded her injured body. Her silver eyes stayed fixed on Ethan. The human still showed no fear. Even now, surrounded by armed guards and royal officials, he looked more annoyed than nervous. That alone confused her. Most beings feared the royal family more than death itself. But Ethan behaved as if none of this mattered. A young royal guard suddenly stepped forward angrily. "You will kneel before the Queen." Ethan glanced at him. "She's getting medical treatment." "That is not the point." The guard's voice echoed across the chamber. "You touched royal blood." Ethan frowned slightly. "She was injured. You had no permission. She was falling." The guard opened his mouth, but stopped, because there was no answer to that. The room became awkwardly quiet. Queen Serelith finally spoke. "Human." Ethan looked toward her immediately. "You understood the consequences of your actions." "Not really," he admitted honestly. Several guards stared at him in disbelief. The Queen narrowed her eyes slightly. "You carried me despite knowing our laws." Ethan shrugged. "I saw someone injured." The simple answer silenced the room again. No speeches, no excuses, just honesty. For reasons Serelith could not explain. That honesty disturbed her more than fear ever could. Most people acted carefully around power. This human simply acted. The medical scanners suddenly flashed red again. One physician looked alarmed. "We need to begin treatment immediately." Mechanical surgical arms lowered from the ceiling. The Queen's broken leg was carefully secured while healing devices prepared to repair the shattered bones. Ethan quietly stepped backward. But before treatment started, Serelith spoke once more. "Why did you help me?" The question surprised everyone in the room. Even Ethan looked confused. "Because you needed help. That is all. What else would it be?" The Queen stared at him silently. For the first time in many years, someone had spoken to her without fear, politics, or hidden motives. And somehow that felt more dangerous than open hatred. Then suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. Heavy armored soldiers stormed inside with plasma rifles raised. Royal Guard elites. The atmosphere instantly turned tense. Behind them walked High Commander Varric. Cold. Feared across the Empire. And known for his hatred toward humans. His yellow eyes locked onto Ethan immediately. "So the rumors are true," Varric said darkly. Nobody moved. Varric slowly approached the human. "You carried the Queen before the entire fleet." Ethan crossed his arms. "She couldn't walk." Murmurs spread among the guards. The commander's expression hardened. "You speak casually for someone standing inside a royal chamber after committing treason." Ethan looked genuinely tired now. "If helping injured people is treason, your laws are terrible." Several guards visibly panicked. One officer quietly whispered, "He's insane." Commander Varric stepped closer. "You believe human morality is above imperial law?" "I believe broken legs should be treated." The answer nearly broke the commander's patience. Varric's hand slowly moved toward his weapon. The guards tensed immediately. One wrong word could start bloodshed inside the medical chamber itself. Enough. The Queen's voice stopped everything instantly. Despite the pain, Serelith slowly sat upright on the medical platform. Every guard immediately lowered their heads. Varric bowed slightly. "Your Majesty, the human violated sacred law." "He preserved my life," the Queen answered calmly. "He touched royal blood. And I permitted his actions after the fact." "Silence." Absolute silence. The room understood what that meant. The Queen had just protected the human publicly. Commander Varric's jaw tightened. "With respect, Your Majesty. The Emperor will not ignore this." The moment he said those words, tension returned instantly. Because everyone knew the truth. The Emperor despised humans. And unlike the Queen, he showed no mercy. As if summoned by the warning itself, emergency alarms echoed through the chamber. A communications officer rushed inside, pale with fear. "Your Majesty." The officer struggled to breathe. "We have incoming transmission authority from the Imperial throne." Even the doctors froze. Commander Varric stepped back immediately. The room lights dimmed. Then a massive red hologram appeared above the center of the chamber. The symbol of the Imperial Empire burned brightly in the air. A deep mechanical voice echoed across the flagship. "Attention, Royal Fleet." Every soldier stood perfectly still. The human identified as Ethan Cole. The voice paused for several seconds. "Will be surrendered to Imperial authority immediately." The chamber fell completely silent. Slowly, every eye turned toward Ethan. The war was finally over. Or at least, that was what the Alliance fleet wanted to believe. Burning wreckage drifted silently through space like broken stars. Giant alien warships floated between clouds of smoke and shattered metal, while rescue drones searched for survivors among the ruins. For 14 straight hours, the battle above the planet Verex had turned space itself into hell. Thousands of ships had been destroyed. Millions were dead. And now the surviving fleet waited in complete silence for one answer. Was Queen Seralith still alive? Inside command centers across hundreds of ships, officers stared nervously at damaged screens. Emergency alarms flashed red through dark hallways while injured soldiers filled every medical deck. Nobody spoke loudly anymore, because everyone knew one terrifying truth. If the Queen had died today, the Alliance would collapse by morning. Far below the fleet, the royal flagship slowly emerged from a cloud of fire and smoke. Or what remained of it. The massive ship looked destroyed. Half the outer armor was melted away. Entire sections burned without control. One of the engines exploded again, sending sparks across the battlefield. "She's not coming out," one alien officer whispered quietly. Another soldier lowered his head. Even the hardened generals looked pale. Then suddenly, movement appeared inside the ruined hangar. A figure slowly stepped through the smoke. The entire fleet froze. Queen Seralith was alive. Every military camera instantly focused on her. For a brief second, relief spread across the Alliance. Then the cameras zoomed closer. And relief turned into horror. The Queen was injured. Badly injured. Her black royal armor was cracked across the chest, exposing glowing silver lines beneath her skin. Blood dripped slowly from her arm. But the worst injury was her leg. Her right leg bent unnaturally with every step. Broken. Still, Queen Seralith continued walking alone through the burning hangar. No guards supported her. No medics touched her. Because royal tradition forbade it. A queen of the Thalrex Empire was never allowed to appear weak before soldiers. Even dying rulers walked alone. And Seralith followed that law exactly. Every painful step echoed across the silent fleet. Clang, clang, clang. The Queen's face remained cold, but the shaking in her body betrayed the truth. She was barely standing. Inside the command bridge of the human destroyer Resolute, Commander Ethan Cole watched the live broadcast carefully. Unlike the alien officers around him, Ethan did not care about royal traditions. He only saw someone seriously injured. "That leg is destroyed," he muttered. Beside him, an alien lieutenant quickly shook his head. "Do not say that out loud." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "Because if the Queen hears weakness mentioned publicly, she may execute the speaker herself." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "She can barely walk." "That changes nothing," the lieutenant whispered nervously. "She is still the Queen." Back inside the ruined hangar, Smoke curled around Serelith as emergency lights flashed above her head. The massive doors ahead slowly opened. Thousands of soldiers waited outside. All kneeling. All silent. The Queen reached the doorway, then suddenly stopped moving. Her injured leg trembled violently. Several royal guards noticed it immediately. Fear spread across their faces, because they understood what would happen next. The Queen tried to take another step. Pain shot through her body. Her vision blurred. And finally, her leg gave out completely. The ruler of the most powerful empire in the galaxy began to fall. Gasps echoed across every ship watching the broadcast. No! She's collapsing! Protect the Queen! Several guards rushed forward. But someone moved faster. Human. Commander Ethan Cole crossed the hangar before anyone understood what was happening. Without hesitation, he caught the Queen before she hit the metal floor. The entire fleet went silent. Not normal silence. Absolute silence. Even the alarms suddenly felt distant. Millions of soldiers stared at their screens in complete shock. Because in over 3,000 years of Thalrek's history, no outsider had ever touched a ruling queen. Ever. Royal guards instantly reached for weapons. Several generals stood up in panic. One officer nearly shut down the live broadcast entirely. But the real shock came 1 second later. Ethan did not let go. Instead, he carefully slid one arm beneath Serelith's knees and lifted her completely into his arms. Like she weighed nothing. The Queen herself looked stunned. Her silver eyes locked onto the human's face. For the first time in many years, someone had touched her without fear, without permission, without bowing, and somehow, without selfishness. Ethan ignored the horrified stares surrounding him. He looked down at her broken leg and spoke calmly. "You need medical treatment now." The nearest royal guard finally reacted. "Put the Queen down." Plasma rifles powered on across the hangar. Dozens of weapons aimed directly at Ethan's head. But strangely, the Queen raised one hand weakly. Every guard froze instantly. Nobody moved. Serelith continued staring at the human carrying her through the burning wreckage. "You are aware," she said quietly, "that touching royal blood without permission is punishable by death?" Ethan nodded once. "Probably." The Queen blinked slowly. "Then why would you do it?" For a moment, the entire fleet waited for his answer. Ethan finally spoke. "Because you were about to fall." Silence. No speeches. No fear. Just honesty. Something changed in the Queen's expression. Not anger. Not pride. Something far more dangerous. Surprise. Then Ethan calmly walked forward carrying the most feared ruler in the galaxy, while thousands of alien soldiers moved aside in stunned silence. Nobody dared stop him. And across the fleet, millions continued watching the impossible scene unfold live before their eyes. As Ethan disappeared toward the medical wing, one old royal advisor whispered in terror. "If the Emperor sees this," his voice shook badly, "the human will be executed."